is a reading of Revolting, Eco-Absurdist Rebellion by Julian published by Active Distribution. This is, loosely speaking, Chapter 5, Poetry and Praxis. My absurd purpose and intention is to affirm poetry within the context of revolt and share something of its presence within my rebellions, and to express what I have gleaned from brilliant individuals. For the sake of clarity, I have split this into two discrete sections. The focus of the first section is on the subject of art and reason, focusing on two of my earliest and profoundest inspirations, Albert Camus and Oscar Wilde. The attention of the second section is on the post-situationist thought and the practice of guerrilla ontology as a weed that grows out of the revolting soil fertilized by the works of Peter Lamborn Wilson and John Moore. 1. Furthermore, reason, by its very nature, hates life more than anything in the world. That's from Shestov, Potatus Clavium. Reason must servilely reproduce what is given to it, and it reproaches as the greatest of crimes every attempt at free creation. Shestov, Athens and Jerusalem. The inspiration I have taken from Wilde and Camus initially came from what I felt during my earliest interactions with anarchist and individualist philosophies. Wilde's celebration of individualism brings great joy to me, and Camus's affirmation of the struggles that individuality involves through his novella The Outsider, often alternatively titled The Stranger, provokes feelings of sadness and revolt. For a great many years, I have considered Wilde's ideal economy of individualist socialism / egoist communism, arguably, an appeal to creativity. In a society where property doesn't exist and individuals create freely, this is the only economic anti-system I can really affirm, though I do not feel comfortable with the assimilation into socialist / communist ideology and would rather call it individualist tribalism. Likewise, in my revolt towards mechanic annihilation, systematized slaughter, and industrial negativity, Camus' revolt against institutional violence is something I resonated with, even though I myself have not found great inspiration from Camus' activism and political engagement. Conversely, for as long as I have looked upon Wilde as a political thinker and rebel, I have found him intensely inspirational. This is largely due to his creativity and position as a homosexual public figure, considered so dangerous to the British state that it felt the need to brutalise him so cruelly, and him surviving as an unrepentant individual, rebelling through continuing to write, in exile, after this revolting experience. Camus was not fond of the philosophy that Wilde embraced and advanced, due to his understanding of Wilde's aestheticism, which I look upon as a misunderstanding. Camus attempted a criticism of Wilde's aestheticism in his speech titled Create Dangerously, delivered in 1957. Camus affirms something that I thoroughly agree with, that to create today is to create dangerously, but with this as oppositional to Wilde's affirmation of art for art's sake. Camus' hostility towards Wilde comes from two places, both of which involve misunderstandings. The first hostile ground is that of not seeing Wilde's position as an affirmation of absurd unreasonableness. To do art for art's sake is to do it without reason to do so, as an absurd reason. It is to create for the sake of creation, rather than towards some notion of direction or out of some concept of being caused to do so. It is an affirmation of absurd freedom. Doing this for the sake of this strikes me as beautifully sincere and authentic ground from which to discuss activist praxis. When I care for badgers, I am doing so for the sake of badgers. I could give absurd reasons. We're living in a mass extinction event and I want to defend life, blah, blah, blah. But at the core of it, the act is one of aestheticism. I am doing it to do it. An individual sees a child fall over and helps them up, not for the sake of humanity or out of hope that the child, inspired by this kindness, might grow to do great things. They help them up to help them up, and there is nothing wrong with that unreasonableness. When Camus rejects Wilde's art for the sake of art, he is in many ways failing to notice the absurdity of events and actions, which is at the core of the absurdist philosophy he beautifully articulates within his writings. The second hostile ground is that of Camus' embrace of cause through libertarian, socialist slash anarcho syndicalist ideology, which is a renunciation of absurdism and akin to what Camus called philosophical suicide. It feels fair to generalize Camus' rejection of Wilde as art should be assimilated into cause. This throws up all the absurdities of casual reasoning, which I find no basis for accepting. There is no apparent reason for causation unless we renounce the ground of uncertainty and agnosticism for comforting stories. It is deeply uncomfortable being with absurdity. Gamers seeking to flee from it into some leftist cause is something I can sympathise with, though it strikes me as an inauthentic flight, a flight into inauthenticity. I deeply appreciate the authenticity I see in Wilde. Camus states in his speech, the greater an artist's revolt against the world's reality, the greater can be the weight of reality to balance that revolt. I left this less. Sorry, I read this less as a comment about the world as earth slash life, and more as a description of this culture's dialectical annihilation of challenging artists, something Wilde knew better than most. This is the danger that real creativity poses. At its most extreme is the attempt to negate slash annihilate through death. That Wilde's writings and philosophy have survived after his death signifies the immense power in his creativity. Thinking about the deep absurdity of his thought, I am reminded of Wilde's words in Lady Windermere's Fan that life is far too important a thing to ever talk seriously about. The comic quality reminds me of the not yet funny joke of Timothy Morton's Dark Ecology that, in an attempt to escape slash transcend the impact of global warming 10,000 years ago, civilization has succeeded in creating far worse global warming now. I half smile as I write this, but feel sadness too. I look over the sentence I just wrote and fall into a deeper smile over the absurdity of what I just wrote, the absurdity of what I am writing, and the absurdity of it all. It is utterly absurd for Morton Zerzan, me, or any other commenter on civilization to answer the question of why civilization has been built, not just due to none of us having been there to experience the event, but the appeal to causation is an appeal to the groundless absurdity, inauthenticity, and reality constructing based in guesses, assumptions, and the projections of our lived experiences onto ghosts. It is utter absurdity for me to continue writing this, so why do I? I am writing this for the sake of writing it without any possible knowledge of whether or not it will have anything amounting to a meaningful impact upon any individual's lived experience or other absurd reason to be. With it all being absurd, I am free to continue with an awareness that I'm doing this with revolting integrity, that this is coming from a rebellion of absurd caring, a refusal to be indifferent, an embrace of positivity that is defiant before the negation of Moloch's consumption, thinking of Aragorn, considering me corny. I read this and laugh again and enjoy an internal joke about him in the afterlife, continuing to be disappointed in my writings. I hope that the grumpy nihilist fucker in the land of ghosts is hating what I am writing. This brings up feelings of sadness in me and a longing for many who have been lost, including that mean arsehole who I knew as a friend. Continuing along the theme of absurd hilarity, sad jokes and or tragicomedy, and somewhat drawing from Aragorn's mean humour, my mind turns to another somewhat not yet funny failure, though one that Aragorn would laugh at. Here is my best attempt to articulate it. In an attempt to improve life, the world, and the human experience, the left, revolutionaries, and progressivists have succeeded in enabling the worsening of life, the world, and the human experience. They have brought all of us to the point of utter ruination through small incremental improvements that amount to small and increasingly fleeting comforts, which make the abusive narratives of Leviathan somewhat more tolerable to some and thus more sustainable. What I just wrote is absurd, but certainly not funny, and I feel somewhat revolted by the memory of my friend who lives with me as a ghost. I feel revolted, revolting, and in revolt. My attention turns to revolt as an absurd endeavour. Why revolt? What is revolt? Here, at the centre of a world in revolt, Lodeum Rodegas position revolt as a ground for insurrection and revolution, as something transcending this world by leading into another. In species being and other stories, DuPont positions revolt as humanity's innate negativity towards nature, towards what they call communism, which humanity would likely revolt against too. Transcendence and negation. Neither of these answers are my answers, they are both revolting. I feel revolted and rebellious towards the revolutionary and communist causes. I am revolted. I am revolting. I grab a poetry collection off my bookcase and notice the beautiful absurdity of all the creativity. I hear birds singing in my garden and feel affirmation of their being alive as revolting against the annihilation of wildlife that is domestication and Leviathan. I am not resigned and embrace no renunciation. I am revoltingly positive, and Aragorn's ghost is revolted by me. I laugh again. From this point of view, order appears as death, cessation, crystallization, alien silence, Hakim immediatism. The anarchist as poet aims to create and recreate the world endlessly through motility and revolt. John Moore, Anarchist Speculations. While I am intentionally drawing from Hakim Bey, Peter Lamborn Wilson, and John Moore, I certainly do not feel that either of these individuals knew the true path or claim that they provided a system for revolters and rebels to conform to, or that such a system would be the answer to the problems that the system presents. The former's writings and thoughts are in places more revolting, brackets, disgusting, than they are revolt inspiring, and the later always leaves me wanting more. What I am describing here is something something of how I have treated poetry as very much at the core of my breaking out of conformity to normative social expectations, alongside the influence both of these have had on this practice. I make two observations at this point. The first is that I have no way to justify this practice, and that I have not engaged in this activity for the sake of any cause, but have very much done it for the sake of doing it. The second observation is that this has seemingly been me being absurd and somewhat intensifying that strangeness that the world is. I'm sat at the base of a statue near Exeter Cathedral, sharing my food with the pigeons, with birds jumping on my knees, seeking to practice solidarity with non human living beings and coexistence practice. The people watching me, surrounded by these so called pests, all have their own perceptions and interpretations of what is happening. To some, this is grotesque and they look on in horror. To tourists, this is a beautiful moment and they take a photo. I continue hoping that for the pigeons, this is a moment of beauty, joy, and easiness amidst the urban environment of the city, which is so hostile towards wildlife. This is not a protest. This is not riotous. This is not revolutionary. This is not organising. What is this? Hakenbay's concept of poetic terrorism lifts poetry off the page and away from the voice towards actions and ways of engaging with others. These are acts of artistic engagement that another individual might witness and experience some level of feeling engaged, but are really done simply for the sake of doing it. I display several automatic art pieces I have created in a public toilet and leave them there, with an absurd reasoning of them being found and looked upon as something absurd by whoever finds them. Is this poetry? No, this is art. Is poetry not art? What makes something poetic? Poetry and the poetic invoke something of the non functional, non practical, without utility, yet powerful, beautiful, done with desire to affect. An individual approaches me asking for help with a minor task they could easily do themselves. I help them. It does not support any cause or purpose other than the absurd poetic desire to affect this individual by their feeling helped. I'm sat with someone and they ask me what I do. What do I say? Do I tell them my means of making a living? Do I tell them that I am a writer, knowing that they will assume that means I make money through writing, and then that will lead to boring conversations about fringe philosophy and the lack of income writers get? I tell them that I wander with untamable beasts and birds between the trees, that are the remaining traces of the rainforest that once covered this archipelago, eating wild garlic and trying to summon bears back. They look confused but pleased with my response. John Moore, in his essay Lived Poetry, advocates poetic language as a means of anarchist practice, rebelling against the systems of verbal communications that the system encourages and subverting the social norms. A colleague says to me that the sun is beautiful today, and I respond by saying it's a giant explosion in outer space, and since we stopped worshipping it with sacrificial offerings and started serving the will of capitalism, it has gotten angry, and the polar ice caps are melting, so huge areas of this archipelago in the North Sea are soon going to be underwater. They laugh awkwardly and respond with, "Yes, Julian." This gift of poetry is dark and ecologically pessimistic. It will not cause a shift in my colleagues' lifestyle, let alone impact any of their productive narratives. It was an unreasonable response. It is absurd to want it to have some impact upon their ecological awareness, but I want this. Within organisational activism, there is often a distinction made between above ground and underground actions and groups. I do not consider my activities to fall within the framework of this praxis, and feel somewhat revolted by the binary and a lot of what goes with it. Taking inspiration from Peter Lamborn Wilson's concept of endarkenment and Moore's concept of the psychogeographical space of the wilderness, I have engaged in activities largely with a desire to leave in a state of uncertainty why a situation or space is not why it is. I have termed this practice non-localizable localism, non-localizable in that no one can find who did it or why, localism in that it is geographically local to where I live. This involves my anti-cull and guerrilla gardening activities, which I share from a desire to be an example of these activisms being done as an individualist praxis. I am not entirely open about them simply because I do not want the machine to be aware of what I have done and where. I include these non-localizable localism activities here because I see them being deeply connected to endarkenment and bewilderness praxes. Both are example of the poetic in ontological anarchist slash guerrilla ontologist rebellion. Ontological anarchist slash guerrilla ontologist rebellion, while it has the potential to be assimilated within causes, as totalities seek to totalize, it is not inherently oriented towards cause. This renders it revolting to those who seek to systematize and who ultimately feel only tolerant of the existence of the presence of what they see as being able to be granted some reason to justify the existence of something under some utilitarian logic. To such individuals, and to end this piece on poetry and praxis, I offer this poem. Bomb, pom, smash, dash, 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 scurrying little feet, knock, 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 tweet, 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 gumph, plop, stop, run, stop. Avocados are not a friend to men who are mice, or mice who are men. Humphrey, fly, quick, live, don't die, plop, 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 plop. Okay, thank you for listening. That was chapter 5. I don't remember what I said, I think it was 5. And that was poetry and praxis. The uh, next chapter is chapter 6, death camp resistance. I imagine there will be a trigger warning on that one, looking at the first few lines. So I'll try and remember to do that. Thank you for listening though. Have a nice day.